You are Catherine Howard, barely 20 years old, standing in the Tower of London on a February morning in 1542. The stone walls around you have witnessed countless executions, but none quite like what's about to unfold. Tomorrow, you will lose your head not because you committed treason, but because a king decided your past made you inconvenient. Your crime wasn't betraying England. Your crime was existing as a woman with a history that Henry VIII could weaponize against his enemies. What you're about to discover challenges every romanticized narrative about Henry VIII that popular culture has fed you for decades. This isn't the story of a passionate king searching for true love or legitimate heirs. This is the documented account of how one man transformed marriage into a political weapon so devastating that it would reshape English society for generations. The systematic destruction he unleashed on the wives and daughters of his enemies reveals a calculated brutality that modern audiences struggle to comprehend. Before we examine what really happened behind the closed doors of Tudor palaces, if you find these darker investigations into royal history compelling, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps us uncover more forgotten stories that textbooks often sanitize or ignore entirely. Now, let's explore how Henry VIII turned intimate relationships into instruments of terror, and why his treatment of enemy wives represents one of history's most sophisticated campaigns of psychological warfare. The year is 1509. Henry ascends to the throne at 18, in a gestating not crown, but a kingdom filled with noble families whose loyalty remains questionable. Unlike his predecessors who relied primarily on military force to crush opposition, Henry understood something far more insidious. Destroying a man's political power meant nothing if his family could rebuild influence later. But destroying his wife, his daughters, his sister, that eliminated bloodlines entirely, while sending unmistakable messages to anyone considering rebellion. Henry's approach to enemy wives began developing during his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon. When powerful Spanish nobles questioned his authority or supported alternative claimants to the English throne, Henry didn't simply execute the men involved. He systematically targeted their female relatives, understanding that attacking women created psychological devastation that extended far beyond individual victims. The practice started subtly, with social ostracism and property confiscation, but would evolve into something far more deadly. The case of Elizabeth Blount reveals how Henry began weaponizing relationships for political control. When Elizabeth bore Henry an illegitimate son in 1519, she didn't simply become another royal mistress forgotten by history. Henry used her connection to him as leverage against her husband Gilbert Taleboys and his family's political networks. Those who supported Taleboys found their wives suddenly unwelcome at court, their daughters unmarriageable, their family connections severed from royal favour. The message was unmistakable: cross the king and your women would pay the price. But Henry's systematic approach to controlling enemy wives truly crystallised during his pursuit of Anne Boleyn. The Boleyn family had connections throughout European nobility, and Henry recognised that marrying Anne would give him unprecedented access to intelligence about potential threats. More importantly, it would allow him to identify which noble families supported his break from Rome and which remained loyal to traditional Catholic alliances. Those who questioned his marriage to Anne discovered that their wives faced immediate consequences. Lady Mary Tudor, Henry's own sister, experienced firsthand how her brother weaponized family relationships against political opponents. When Mary secretly married Charles Brandon without royal permission, Henry's rage wasn't just about protocol, it was about control. He used Mary's unauthorized marriage as justification for seizing properties from families who had supported the union, while systematically destroying the reputations of women who had served as witnesses or confidants. The punishment extended far beyond Mary herself, creating a network of female suffering designed to terrorize other noble families into absolute compliance. The establishment of the Court of High Commission in 1534 provided Henry with legal mechanisms to formalize his attacks on enemy wives. This ecclesiastical court could investigate moral charges against women with devastating efficiency. Accusations of adultery, heresy, or conspiracy required no substantial evidence, only royal suspicion. Once charges were filed, the women faced impossible choices: confess to crimes they hadn't committed and face imprisonment or execution, maintain innocence and watch their families destroyed through association with their alleged misconduct. Archaeological evidence from Tower of London excavations reveals the infrastructure Henry developed specifically for processing accused women. Specialized chambers with reinforced doors, drainage systems, and carefully designed interrogation rooms suggest systematic preparation for handling female prisoners. These weren't improvised spaces created during moments of royal anger. They were permanent installations designed to break women psychologically before their trials even began. The fate of Gertrude Courtenay, Marchioness of Exeter, demonstrates the calculated precision Henry brought to destroying enemy wives. When her husband, Henry Courtenay, was executed for treason in 1538, Gertrude wasn't simply widowed and forgotten. Henry ensured she remained imprisoned for years, watching her son educated in royal custody while she lived in constant uncertainty about his fate. The psychological torture was deliberate. By keeping her alive but powerless, Henry created a living example of what happened to women whose husbands dared challenge royal authority. The systematic nature of these attacks becomes clear when examining Henry's treatment of Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury. At 67 years old, Margaret represented the last legitimate Plantagenet claim to the throne. Rather than executing her immediately, Henry kept her imprisoned for 2 years, allowing her to witness the destruction of her entire family. Her sons were killed, her grandson fled into exile, and her female relatives faced systematic persecution. Only when Henry had completely eradicated her family's political influence did he finally order her execution, carried out with such brutal incompetence that it required multiple axe blows to complete. The documentation systems Henry's administration used to track these campaigns' erratic sophist reveal the bureaucration behind what appeared to be personal vendettas. Court records show detailed surveillance of noble wives, monitoring their correspondence, their religious practices, their social connections, and their private conversations. Women discovered that servants in their households reported directly to royal agents, that their confessors shared their secrets with government officials, and that their closest friends might be gathering intelligence about their loyalty to the crown. The intelligence networks Henry established to monitor enemy wives operated with terrifying efficiency across every level of English society. Kitchen staff, ladies in waiting, even priests were recruited to report suspicious activities, creating an atmosphere where women lived in constant fear that their most private moments might be weaponized against them. The psychological impact was devastating. Noble wives began isolating themselves, afraid to speak freely even with their own children, knowing that any conversation could be twisted into evidence of treason. Henry's marriage to Jane Seymour in 1536 marked a new phase in his systematic campaign against enemy wives. Jane's family, the Seymours, had extensive connections to families Henry considered politically unreliable. Rather than simply eliminating these potential threats through traditional means, Henry used his new marriage as an opportunity to gather intelligence about their private lives. Women who had once felt secure in their social positions discovered that their new queen's relatives were documenting their every move, their religious observances, their correspondence with foreign courts. The speed with which Henry could destroy women became legendary throughout European courts. When Jane Seymour died in childbirth in 1537, Henry's grief transformed into paranoid rage against anyone he suspected of insufficient loyalty during her pregnancy. Lady Margaret Douglas, his own niece, found herself imprisoned in the Tower simply because she had married without his permission during Jane's final months. The message was clear. Even royal blood offered no protection when Henry decided a woman had become inconvenient. But perhaps nowhere was Henry's systematic approach more visible than in his treatment of the Howard family women during his marriage to Catherine Howard. The Howards represented old Catholic nobility with extensive European connections, making them natural targets for Henry's suspicions. When rumours about Catherine's past began circulating in 1541, Henry didn't simply investigate his wife. He launched a comprehensive campaign against every woman connected to the Howard family network. Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, found herself imprisoned despite being Catherine's step-grandmother and having no involvement in whatever indiscretions Catherine might have committed. Catherine Tilney and Alice Restwold, who had served in the Dowager Duchess's household, faced interrogation, imprisonment, and the constant threat of execution. These women hadn't committed any crimes beyond existing within Henry's expanding definition of guilt by association. The legal procedures Henry developed for processing these cases reveal the calculated nature of his approach. Traditional English law required substantial evidence for treason charges, but Henry's courts began accepting testimony extracted through torture, hearsay from servants, and interpretations of women's behaviour that bordered on mind-reading. A woman's failure to report another woman's suspected misconduct became evidence of conspiracy. Friendship with accused individuals became treason itself. The interrogation techniques employed against these women were specifically designed to break their psychological resistance. Records describe sessions lasting days, with women kept in freezing conditions, deprived of sleep, and subjected to constant questioning about intimate details of their lives. The goal wasn't just extracting confessions, it was creating public spectacles of female submission that would terrorize other noble families into absolute compliance with royal authority. Catherine Parr's survival as Henry's final wife demonstrates how thoroughly he had perfected his system of control through terror. Catherine understood that her survival depended not just on pleasing Henry, but on ensuring that every woman in her household remained above suspicion. She established internal surveillance systems, required her ladies-in-waiting to report each other's activities, and maintained detailed records of every conversation that might be construed as politically sensitive. The broader implications of Henry's war against enemy wives extended throughout English society, creating precedents that would influence legal and social structures for generations. Local magistrates began applying similar techniques against women in their own jurisdictions, understanding that systematic persecution of wives and daughters could eliminate entire family networks more effectively than traditional legal proceedings. The economic dimensions of these campaigns reveal their calculated nature. When Henry destroyed enemy wives, he simultaneously seized their properties, their inheritances, and their families' accumulated wealth. The crown benefited financially from every destroyed marriage, every confiscated dowry, every estate left without heirs. This wasn't random female cruelty driven by personal. It was systematic passion transfer wealth disguised as moral enforcement. The international ramifications of Henry's policies created diplomatic crises throughout Europe. Foreign ambassadors reported that English noble families were becoming unwilling to arrange marriages with European houses, fearing that any international connection might be interpreted as treasonous. The isolation this created served Henry's purposes perfectly, reducing outside influences that might challenge his authority while ensuring that English nobility remained dependent entirely on royal favour. The psychological warfare embedded in these procedures extended beyond immediate victims to terrorize entire generations of English women. Mothers began teaching their daughters that survival required absolute invisibility, that any display of intelligence, ambition, or independence might attract deadly royal attention. The cultural transformation was profound, creating patterns of female submission that would define English aristocracy for centuries. Archaeological evidence from execution sites reveals the public spectacle Henry created around these destructions. Viewing platforms were constructed to accommodate crowds, suggesting that the deaths of enemy wives served as entertainment, designed to reinforce royal power locations. The chosen for these executions were carefully selected for maximum psychological impact, often sites associated with the women's families or their former positions of influence. The documentation systems preserving records of these campaigns demonstrate bureaucratic sophistication that rivals modern intelligence operations. Detailed files tracked not just the accused women, but their extended family networks, their servants, their religious advisors, and anyone who had them shown friendship or support. These records served as templates for future persecutions, creating institutional knowledge about how to systematically destroy women who became inconvenient to royal interests. What emerges from court records, archaeological evidence, and surviving correspondence is a picture of calculated dehumanization operating with industrial precision while maintaining legal and religious justifications that made such treatment seem natural and inevitable. Over nearly 4 decades of rule, Henry VIII transformed the persecution of women from sporadic royal cruelty into systematic state policy that operated with bureaucratic precision across 3 continents of influence. The evidence carved in court records, written in blood on execution blocks, and buried in archaeological sites tells a story that shatters every romantic myth about Tudor England. This wasn't medieval passion or Renaissance excess. This was organized dehumanization that weaponized marriage, motherhood, and female relationships themselves. Hundreds of women vanished into Henry's machine of political terror, their names erased from official records, their voices silenced forever, their humanity reduced to strategic calculations in royal ledgers. Catherine Howard's execution wasn't an isolated tragedy born of royal jealousy. It was the culmination of a system that had already destroyed countless mothers, daughters, wives, and sisters, whose only crime was existing within reach of a king who understood that controlling women meant controlling civilization itself. The psychological scars Henry inflicted on English society would define gender relationships for generations, creating patterns of female submission and male dominance that extended far beyond his own reign. When we celebrate Henry as a powerful monarch or debate his marriages as romantic drama, we participate in the same historical amnesia that allowed these atrocities to be normalized in the first place. The women who died screaming his name deserved better than to be forgotten by history, and we owe it to their memory to remember not just how they died, but why a king decided they had to.